Houston, Texas was home to one of the largest Mexican communities in the United States. Every weekend, families gathered for celebrations, and no festival was complete without the iconic dish of menudo, a rich soup of beef tripe, hominy, chili peppers, and spices. For generations, this dish had symbolized comfort, tradition, and family unity. But on a sweltering Sunday morning, the community woke up to rumors that would forever taint their view of the beloved soup. At a small family-owned restaurant in the heart of the Latin district, dozens of customers began complaining about the taste of the menudo served that morning. "It tastes off," one man said, clutching his stomach. Another woman gagged, describing the flavor as metallic, with a sickening, gamey undertone. Within hours, word spread like wildfire. Something's wrong with the menudo at Hector's place. What seemed like an ordinary food complaint quickly escalated into hysteria when a young woman named Maria Gonzalez, just 23 years old, was reported missing. Her parents told police she had been working a late shift at that very restaurant the night before the festival. She never returned home. Her phone went dead around midnight, and none of her friends had heard from her since. The coincidence was too disturbing to ignore. Maria disappeared, and the very next morning, the soup from her workplace tasted horrifyingly unnatural. Detective Miguel Alvarez, a seasoned officer of Mexican descent, was assigned the case. He had handled violent crimes before, but something in his gut told him this investigation would be unlike anything he had ever faced. By midday, the police arrived at the restaurant. The smell of chili and simmering meat still filled the air, but beneath it lingered another odor, thicker, heavier, unmistakably wrong. In the kitchen stood the enormous steel pot of menudo, still bubbling over the flames. Hector Ramirez, the owner of the restaurant, nervously wiped sweat from his brow as customers scattered outside, whispering in horror. Detective Alvarez approached the pot, peering into the broth. He saw the expected strips of tripe, the kernels of hominy, the red oil floating on the surface. But then his eyes narrowed. Among the tripe, there were pieces of meat that didn't look right at all, pale, soft, and eerily similar to human flesh. His heart pounded. He motioned for his forensic team to secure the pot immediately. The restaurant was shut down, sealed as a crime scene. Alvarez turned to Hector, who stammered, "It's just beef, detective. From the market, cheap cuts, nothing more." But Alvarez had seen enough crime scenes to know that Hector was hiding something. Outside, the crowd grew restless. Rumors spun out of control. Did they really put human meat in the soup? Some asked in trembling voices. Could Maria have been cooked into that menudo? Others whispered, clutching rosaries in fear. The story hit local radio by afternoon, spreading across Houston's airwaves. Suspicious soup linked to missing young woman. By evening, television crews had gathered outside the restaurant, their cameras zooming in on the pot being carried out under heavy police guard. What had started as a Sunday tradition had transformed into a nightmare. For the first time in Houston's history, the community's most cherished dish was at the center of a potential homicide investigation. Detective Alvarez looked around at the terrified faces in the crowd and muttered under his breath, "If this soup is what I think it is, then we're standing at the edge of something truly monstrous." Detective Miguel Alvarez had seen many crime scenes in his 20 years with the Houston Police Department, but the kitchen of Hector Ramirez's restaurant was unlike anything he had ever walked into. The clatter of reporters outside, the murmurs of the frightened crowd, and the smell of simmering broth all seemed to fade as he focused on the massive steel pot in front of him. The forensic team carefully lifted the lid, releasing a cloud of steam that carried a sickening mix of chili, garlic, and something darker, something that curled in Alvarez's nostrils and made his stomach twist. Floating near the surface were fleshy chunks that, to the untrained eye, might have looked like fatty pork. But Alvarez had worked homicide long enough to recognize the subtle differences in texture. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't beef tripe. He gave the order immediately. "Bag it. Seal the pot. We'll run DNA tests as soon as possible." As the team moved the pot into a containment container, Alvarez's eyes scanned the rest of the kitchen. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. Shelves of spices, crates of onions, dried chilies stacked high. But near the garbage bin, something caught his eye. A rag, half soaked in dried blood, shoved beneath a pile of cardboard. "Get that to the lab," Alvarez said sharply. Beneath the counter, the tile floor glistened faintly under the fluorescent lights. When he crouched down, he noticed faint reddish smears trailing toward the back door. Someone had tried to wash them away, but the faint outline of shoe prints remained, preserved in diluted blood. Size 10, maybe 11, one forensic officer noted. Heavy tread, work boots. Alvarez's jaw tightened. Whoever walked through that kitchen had stepped in blood, then tried to scrub it clean. Meanwhile, Hector Ramirez stood against the wall, his hands trembling. He was a stout man in his 50s, known in the community as a friendly, if somewhat unlucky businessman. But under the harsh glare of the police lights, he looked like a cornered animal. "I didn't kill anyone," Hector blurted when Alvarez approached. "The meat came from the night market. I swear. I just bought what they sold me. I don't know where it came from." Alvarez fixed him with a hard stare. "A young woman is missing. She worked here. Her family hasn't seen her since last night. And this morning, you serve a pot of menudo that tastes like death. You better start talking, Hector, because right now, your kitchen looks like a slaughterhouse." Hector's face drained of color. His lips trembled, but he said nothing more. Outside, the media frenzy reached a boiling point. Headlines began to appear online within hours. Menudo of horror? Police investigate human flesh in Houston soup. Missing woman linked to restaurant mystery. Community in shock as beloved dish turns into nightmare. Families who had eaten at the restaurant that morning rushed to hospitals, demanding tests, terrified that they had consumed human remains. By nightfall, the DNA tests from the preliminary samples were expedited. The lab confirmed traces of human tissue in the soup. Alvarez received the call while standing outside the restaurant, watching Hector being led away in handcuffs. The detective's blood ran cold. It was no longer speculation, no longer rumor. The soup contained human remains, and now the only question was whose. But in Alvarez's mind, he already knew the answer. The missing girl, Maria Gonzalez, had vanished only hours before the soup was served. And if the tests confirmed her DNA in the broth, then this case would transform from a grotesque mystery into one of the most horrifying homicides Houston had ever seen. As Alvarez lit a cigarette, staring into the humid Texas night, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning. Whoever did this wanted to erase her, one spoonful at a time." The following morning, the forensic lab delivered their first full report to Detective Miguel Alvarez. His worst suspicion had been confirmed. The DNA found in the soup matched Maria Gonzalez. The missing young woman wasn't just connected to the restaurant. Part of her had been cooked and served to unsuspecting customers. The news sent shockwaves through Houston. TV anchors spoke in hushed, horrified tones. Community leaders gathered to console Maria's grieving family. Outside the restaurant, people lit candles and left flowers, turning the street into a shrine of mourning. Yet amid the grief, an even deeper terror took hold. If Maria's body was in the soup, where was the rest of her? Alvarez knew the answer lay somewhere in Hector's kitchen. He and his team returned to the restaurant, this time with a search warrant covering every inch of the premises. They combed through cupboards, refrigerators, storage rooms, and even the grease traps beneath the floor. Hours passed with nothing but empty meat crates and piles of wilted cilantro. Then one officer called out, "Detective, you should see this." In the walk-in freezer, behind boxes of frozen corn and bags of dried chilies, sat a dented metal container wrapped in duct tape. The frost-covered lid was stiff, but when pried open, the contents made every officer in the room flinch. Inside lay chunks of flesh, wrapped haphazardly in butcher's paper. Mixed among them was something that froze Alvarez's blood. A delicate silver bracelet, tarnished from cold, its tiny charm shaped like a heart. He picked it up with gloved hands, recognizing it from the photograph Maria's mother had shown him. "She never takes this off," the mother had said, clutching a framed picture of her daughter. There was no longer any doubt. Maria's body had been butchered in this kitchen. Alvarez stepped back, staring at the heap of flesh. "God help us," he muttered. When confronted with the evidence, Hector Ramirez collapsed in his chair. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "I didn't want this," he mumbled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Then tell me how it happened," Alvarez demanded, slamming the bracelet onto the table. "Tell me why this young woman ended up in your freezer. Tell me why parts of her ended up in your menudo." Hector's lips quivered, but he kept repeating the same words. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." The detective wasn't convinced. He had Hector booked on suspicion of murder, but deep down, he wondered if there was more to the story. The restaurant owner was no criminal mastermind. He was a struggling businessman drowning in debt. But the act of butchering a human body and mixing it into food required a coldness, a level of depravity that didn't quite match the nervous, broken man sitting before him. Alvarez suspected Hector wasn't telling the full truth. Someone else might have been involved. Back at the precinct, he pinned Maria's photo to the investigation board. Beside it, he added the bracelet, the DNA report, and the photographs of the freezer contents. The evidence painted a grotesque but undeniable picture. Maria had been killed in or near the restaurant, dismembered, and partially cooked into a pot of menudo. Now Alvarez needed to uncover motive and method. Why would Hector do something so heinous? Was it desperation? Or was there a darker hand guiding him? That night, as rain pounded against his office window, Alvarez studied the evidence. His instincts gnawed at him. This wasn't just a single man's crime. Something larger was hiding beneath the surface. And then the phone rang. The lab had found traces of Maria's blood in Hector's truck, along with fibers from a tarp. The implication was clear. Maria had been transported after her death, which meant the freezer was not where the killing happened. It was only where the remains were hidden. Alvarez leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The investigation was far from over. If Hector wasn't the killer, then who was? And how many others knew the true recipe of that horrific menudo? Detective Miguel Alvarez sat across from Hector Ramirez in the cold interrogation room. The silver bracelet lay on the table between them like a silent witness. Hector's hands were cuffed, his eyes bloodshot from hours without sleep. The weight of evidence pressed down on him. Maria's DNA in the soup, her flesh in the freezer, her blood in his truck. There was nowhere left to run. Still, Hector resisted, muttering the same line, "I didn't kill her. I didn't kill her." Alvarez leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Then tell me who did, because unless I hear the truth, you're the one who served human flesh to an entire community." The words broke something inside Hector. His face crumpled and tears rolled down his cheeks. He whispered, almost inaudible, "It wasn't me. It was the debt." Alvarez frowned. "Debt?" Hector nodded miserably. "I owed money, thousands. The restaurant was failing. The loan sharks, they threatened me. One of them, a man they called El Carnicero, the butcher. He said if I couldn't pay, I'd better find another way to make my business profitable. He delivered meat to me, cheap meat. Told me to use it. I didn't know at first, but then..." Hector broke down, sobbing. "Then I saw the bracelet floating in the pot. That's when I knew. Dios mío. That's when I knew." Alvarez slammed a fist against the table. "You expect me to believe you didn't recognize human flesh when you chopped it into your soup?" "I didn't," Hector wailed. "I swear. I just thought it was odd cuts, strange smell, but I was desperate. If I didn't use it, they'd kill me. I didn't kill Maria. I just cooked what I was given." The detective stared at him, trying to read the truth in his trembling eyes. Was Hector a cowardly accomplice, or was he lying to hide a far darker role? Later that night, Alvarez reviewed the surveillance footage gathered from the area. At 1:17 a.m., Hector's truck was caught driving toward the industrial outskirts of Houston. 2 hours later, it returned, the tarp in the back noticeably stained. Hector hadn't been alone. Another shadowy figure sat in the passenger seat. This was the break Alvarez needed. If Hector wasn't the sole killer, then maybe his story about El Carnicero was real. Armed with this lead, Alvarez ordered a search of the industrial district. Officers scoured abandoned lots, warehouses, and illegal dump sites. The stench of rot guided them to a shallow pit behind a derelict meatpacking plant. There, wrapped in black plastic, they found the rest of Maria's body. The discovery was grisly. Her remains bore signs of butchery, precise cuts made with a professional's skill. Whoever dismembered her wasn't improvising. This was the work of someone who knew how to break down carcasses. Alvarez's stomach twisted. Hector may have been weak, desperate, even complicit, but the brutality of the cuts pointed to someone else entirely. A butcher. Back at the precinct, Alvarez confronted Hector with the evidence. "We found Maria's body. The cuts were clean, surgical. This wasn't just a killing. It was butchery. You're going to tell me who El Carnicero is, or you'll die in prison as the monster who cooked a girl into soup." Hector's face went pale. He whispered the name again. "El Carnicero." But when Alvarez pressed for more, an address, a face, a connection, Hector only shook his head, terrified. If I talk, they'll kill my family. They'll kill me before I ever make it to trial. The detective realized he was no longer chasing just a single desperate man. He was now staring into the abyss of something larger. A network, a man known only as the Butcher, and a trail of blood that stretched far beyond one restaurant kitchen. And as the media frenzy swelled, Alvarez knew one thing for certain. The city of Houston hadn't seen the worst of this case yet. The case of the Menudo soup of blood exploded into a nationwide spectacle. News outlets across America plastered Hector Ramirez's face on their front pages, dubbing him the Cannibal Cook. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse with signs reading "Justice for Maria" and "Shut down the butchers." For the Mexican-American community in Houston, the trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning with horror. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. Maria Gonzalez's parents sat in the front row, clutching rosaries, their faces etched with grief. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras flashing as Hector was brought in, shackled and gaunt. He avoided the gaze of the crowd, his once proud frame slumped in defeat. The prosecution painted Hector as a calculating murderer. They described how he lured Maria into the restaurant after hours, killed her, butchered her body, and deliberately cooked her remains into the soup he served the next day. They displayed the DNA reports, the photographs of flesh in the freezer, and Maria's blood-stained bracelet. This was no accident, the prosecutor thundered. This was a grotesque crime, born of desperation and evil. He served human flesh to innocent people. He robbed a young woman of her life and dignity, and then defiled her body in the most unthinkable way. But Hector's defense told a different story. His lawyer argued he was a victim himself, trapped by crushing debt and terrorized by the shadowy figure known as El Carnicero. According to Hector, this butcher provided the meat, forced him to use it, and orchestrated the disposal of Maria's body. Hector, they claimed, was nothing more than a cowardly pawn. The jury listened, torn between revulsion and doubt. Was Hector truly a sadistic killer, or had he been manipulated by a faceless predator still at large? The turning point came when forensic experts testified about the precise cuts on Maria's body. They confirmed the butchery was executed with professional skill, far beyond Hector's ability as a simple restaurant owner. This revelation opened the door to reasonable doubt. Yet the prosecution countered with damning evidence. Hector's truck, the blood-stained tarp, and the fact that he had served the soup knowing something was wrong. Even if he didn't swing the knife, the prosecutor said coldly, he still chose to stir the pot. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. The city held its breath. When the verdict was read, silence gripped the courtroom. Guilty on charges of manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, and reckless endangerment, but not guilty of premeditated murder. The sentence, life in prison without parole. Gasps rippled through the room. Some were relieved, others outraged. Maria's family wept, clutching each other as the reality sank in. Hector would never walk free again, but the true killer, the elusive El Carnicero, remained a ghost in the shadows. As Hector was led away, reporters shouted questions. He muttered only one chilling phrase before disappearing through the doors. "You'll never find him. The butcher is everywhere." Detective Alvarez stood outside the courthouse, staring at the sea of cameras. He had cracked open a case that shocked the nation, but the victory felt hollow. A young woman was dead, a community scarred, and somewhere in the sprawl of Houston, a man known only as the Butcher was still out there. That night, Alvarez walked home through the rain-soaked streets, the neon lights of taco stands and cantinas glowing in the darkness. Families gathered inside, laughing, eating, sharing bowls of steaming menudo. But for Alvarez, the dish had forever changed. Every aroma of chili and tripe carried the ghost of Maria and the reminder that evil often hides in the most ordinary of places. He whispered to himself as he lit a cigarette, justice was served, but not the whole truth. That closes the 5-part arc. It ends with Hector punished, but leaves the haunting presence of El Carnicero unresolved. Perfect for suspense, and possibly a Part 2 series if you want to expand later.